So at first I thought planes were useless. In a sense, they kind of are, if you compare them to previous Battlefield games where you can farm infantry and be really connected to the ground gameplay. Like in Battlefield 3 you could use the rockets, and in Battlefield 4 you could drop JDAMs with the attack jets. In Battlefield 1 and Battlefield 5, well, you got the bombers, and even the fighters were pretty good. But here we are in Battlefield 2042. They are essentially useless against infantry. But there is one thing they are really good at, which is where my initial thoughts of it being completely useless take a turn. And that is killing land vehicles. Of course, they can kill choppers and other planes. That's really their primary role. But if you factor in that there are only a handful of those on the battlefield, so to occupy the majority of the rest of your time flying, the only viable option would be to hunt ground vehicles with your air-to-ground missiles. And for a cannon, the 30mm is really the only way to go. Most of these clips I'm going to show you are still with the 20mm before I unlocked it, but with the 30mm you can actually damage tanks, so there is really no reason to look back after you unlock it. Once you have unlocked those, that is where the fun begins. And by fun, I suppose that's relative. I will explain in a bit, but the basic strategy for killing pretty much any land vehicles that are not cheap would be to use your 30mm while diving for a second or two, switch to the missile, fire one, and disengage. And for the Jeep, you just fire both and it goes boom. But if they popped thermal smoke and that did not connect, then just repeat this step. Loop back up and log on again. If they have pretty low health, then repeating this same step will probably give you the kill. If they still have decent amount of health, then you want to just fire both missiles. 90% of the time, this will give you the kill. And occasionally, if they didn't pop thermal smoke and on the second run for the kill, they do. And if that's the case, well, you just gotta do it again. And one specific thing about going against a Wildcat is to attack it straight down, because they are still limited by their gun elevation and it doesn't point up that far. Otherwise, you do risk getting killed pretty easily. And to be honest, that kind of it for the strategy. It is pretty bland gameplay loop, with occasional dogfights and chopper hunting, but for the most part, you are just going to be doing this loop thing for the whole time. And this is why I did mention about how fun that is, maybe relative. And as for air superiority, both the 20mm and the 30mm are decent, but since the 30mm is really the only viable option against ground, there is really no reason for you to use the 20mm. Your target priority in the sky would definitely be the plane first, then the attack chopper, then transport. The Nightbird or the Little Bird can be pretty difficult to kill unless you're just extremely good at tracking, or they are pretty much stationary. I recommend just skipping it altogether. It is not worth your time chasing after it. Since you as a jet is already not contributing as much as before, your gameplay loop should be as efficient as possible. But of course that is totally up to you, you play how you like to play. Otherwise, you will want to take out the other air vehicles that I just mentioned in that order, because they are either the highest threat to you to stay alive, which is the enemy jets, or they are the highest threat to your team, which are the attack choppers and the transport heli. And of course, getting those juicy 5 to 6 kills when killing the transport is always a plus. Then the rest of your time should be to focus on killing as many ground vehicles as possible. There are pretty much endless number of them, especially bolts and hovercrafts. This will also help your infantry out. And to quickly mention how to counter these jets if you are indeed in the tank or a Wildcat, there is really no fantastic strategy, because if a jet really wants you dead, you kind of will be in these big open maps. But there are still a few things you can potentially do. First would be to find cover, whether it is a roofed structure or at least park next to a relatively tall structure that would block attack from one direction. This may help if the jet ends up looping and coming in from the direction of the protected side. And second option would be to pop smoke immediately after the jet locks onto you. Most of the time, if you wait, the missile might still land. Third, if you are not in the heat of the combat and is the only one in the vehicle, you can exit the vehicle the moment something locks onto you. This breaks the lock and they would be forced to use a 30mm cannon. But you also risk getting shot and everything that comes with getting out of the vehicle. And the fourth thing, if you are running with a squad, the repair tool is a must. Getting out and repairing is the only viable way to continuously take missiles from one jet without getting killed, because the thermal smoke cooldown is way slower than the rearming cooldown of the missile, so there's no way for you to get out and repair or outplay with countermeasure against jets. Other than that, sticking with your team might be the next best option, hoping some infantry players will have an AA missile, forcing the jet to leave the airspace for a while. But in the end, playing jet is not a very good way to level up, so if that's your goal, then playing supportive infantry role will probably be the most effective. Also, this is not as effective to help win games as jets in previous games, partly due to the fact that you are now 1 in 128 players and not 64. You are also not doing much to infantry if at all, which is probably a very good thing as an infantry player, but not for the pilots. And the jet's ability to influence the outcome of the game is certainly not as great. And perhaps in the future there will be new vehicles introduced to the game with more ground support roles, but until then, getting rid of pretty much every bolt on the ground might be the only main but worthy role of a jet pilot. Or you can just fly the attack chopper and farm infantry. Anyway, that's it, and I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Cheers.
An objective is under siege. You have defeated them into retreat.